Well, let's talk about waivers. That was a great segue, thank you. All right, so Senate Bill 3 did provide an opportunity for a financial waiver to exempt you from the requirements of implementing an emergency preparedness plan. This is similar to what was, or is available, I should say, for the program that's in Harris and Fort Bend County. There has to be documentation that we'll cover. And the documentation, the idea behind it, as I mentioned earlier, is that you need to document that implementing this emergency preparedness plan and everything that goes with that will be more of a financial burden on your customers. And so there's ways you can document. Again, we'll walk through that. Just as an example, to try to follow up on that question a little bit, in the current program in Harris and Fort Bend County, there was approximately 900-ish systems that this applied to. Of those 900 systems, there were issued a little less than 60 waivers. So it is possible to get them. And the waivers range. It's not just small systems. There's some pretty large wholesalers, mostly raw water wholesalers, in the Harris and Fort Bend counties that qualify for the waiver. So it's possible, and then everything in between. So we'll walk through this and see if I can explain that to you guys in a little more in depth, and then you can ask questions. There is a difference in documentation that's required just because of the way money is, or rates and money is collected at a system. You have systems that bill customers and systems that don't bill customers specifically for water. It's included in other costs. And so we're going to walk through the differences of documenting your costs for customers, for systems that bill their customers specifically for water, and for systems that bill their customers and water is wrapped into other fees. All right. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, Senate Bill 3 requires the TCEQ to consider whether complying with this implementing the emergency preparedness plan will be a burden on the affected utilities customers. So what you need to do is basically come up with how much are your customers currently charged on an annual basis for water. It's kind of an average, that we'll come up with. That's the first part of demonstrating the financial burden on your customers. Then the second part is how much is it going to cost you to implement one of these options? What do you have to do? What are the kind of things you need to have done to your system, the kind of improvements, and how much that's going to cost? And those are the two things that you need to document in a waiver. So to come up with your annual costs right now for your customers, we need to start by documenting on a monthly basis how much water, how much you bill for water. This says provide on a spreadsheet. You can provide on a spreadsheet. You can provide it any kind of way, just as long as you can document 12 months of continuous information of how much you charge for water each month per customer. So we'll walk through an example in a little bit. I also wanted to know that this includes all types of customer serves. So, some utilities, they don't have just residential, they have commercial rates, they have industrial rates. Make sure you include all of that in this average monthly water use per connection. Now, to document how much it's going to cost to implement the EPP, there's a lot of information that can be pulled into this. And sometimes there's not enough information provided in some of the waivers that have been submitted in the past in the other program. And so I wanted to make sure that we walk through the things that are acceptable to be submitted as cost. And so engineering quotes, absolutely. If whatever option you're going to choose is going to require you to have an engineer, you have to include that. Also, manufacturing quotes. I know a lot of folks are, looking at the generator option. So how much is that going to cost you? So you want to get a quote from your manufacturer. What is that going to cost me? You can also use, as it says here, is current published price information. So, some of these generator companies are really big. Their information's online. Also, it's distributed through other different types of companies. So if it's something that's published right now on the internet and it's recent, that can be submitted as well. You don't necessarily have to wait on a quote. I know from experience working with a few systems, they're being told now for someone to come out and evaluate their system to determine if they can install a generator, that's taking 60 days. So it's taking 2 months to even get somebody out there to look at it. And so you can use current published price information. The only thing about getting a quote directly from the manufacturer, it's a little more specific for your site. So that's just a choice you just need to make. But that would be acceptable if you can just go online and figure out, hey, this is how much this is going to cost me. If you have to finance, some of the things to implement these options can be a little costly. So you may need to finance that. Those costs need to be included as well. If you have to get a loan, all that is eligible for submission to be evaluated for the waiver. Even things like the slab for the generator, the leveling, the housing, and all that stuff, fencing, and those type of costs are all necessary for you to properly implement the emergency preparedness plan or that option. So then you're able to include those costs in your submission for a waiver. Here's some additional things: spill containment, fuel tanks, site work, all of that. So just want to make sure that you know that everything that you need to do to implement that option needs to be included in your financial waiver submission. Now, if you don't bill customers directly for water, this is for like the RV parks is what I'm thinking about, other type of entities like that where the cost is included in like a monthly fee for everything. So what you want to do is you need to document it a little bit different way that we'll go through here. And then same thing is for the bill customers, just submit all necessary price quotes to implement your emergency operations or emergency preparedness plan. So to demonstrate, if you don't charge specifically for water, how do you come up with your annual cost for your customers? And so you can submit this type of information if you don't bill separately for water service. So if you have an operator, their salary can be included in those costs. Any kind of maintenance you need to do with your system, that can be included. Even sampling costs, your chemicals you treat with, even your electricity costs. That's all can be rolled in to your waiver submission. And then you want to list out how many units you have or connections, and for each month, similar to the billing, then you take those costs on a monthly basis and divide by that. So we'll walk through that specifically here in a bit. And just to reiterate, if you have to secure a loan for this, you can include that. If you have to increase rates, if you go back to the systems that bill separately for water, you can include that rate increase because, again, you're documenting the impact on your customers. So there is a template that TCQ came up with a few years ago. Unfortunately, you folks here with us don't have that template, so I'll walk through. I know the folks online do have the template, and basically it's set up to help you, if you need it. You don't have to use it, but if you need it, to help you organize what you submit. This is just a shot of if you're a bill customer, or if you bill your customer separately for water, just an example of how you would submit that. Some of the additional information in that template walks you through how to document the different costs for a generator. I think if you want to do the distributed energy or like a microgrid, how you put those costs in. Also, your financing costs, your rate increase costs, those are all listed in the template. And so we'll go through that this afternoon on the resources, since the folks here with this don't have that in their packet. All right, so let's go through a few examples to try to make sense of what's submitted. So this is an example of a waiver that was submitted a few years ago. And what they did is they have the 12 months of how much water was billed, how many gallons were billed each month, and then the number of connections each month that was billed against, and it comes up with an average of gallons per connection. And this is the annual average here. The amount of water, which is key, which we'll walk through here in a minute why that's key, and then of course the average water bill per connection. That's the first thing you want to come up with, because that's kind of where you're starting from. If you bill your customers separately from water, this is how much they're paying each person on a average, as an average each annually. So it's really key to provide your rates. And this is, again, an example of a rate structure that's pretty common, that you have a base rate for a set amount of gallons of water. This one's for 2,000. And then as customers' water use increases, their costs increase to use that additional water. And so the key for this is to make sure that you submit your rate structure for evaluation, and make sure you include all the costs there, because you want to make sure we get a good idea of what, on average, each one of your customers is paying for water service. This is an example of documenting emergency operations costs. And so this is a system that purchases water from another water system. And they were a system that was this distribution only. In other words, they don't have their own water source. They don't have any pressure maintenance facilities. And so for them to be able to provide emergency operations to their customers, if they didn't have power service, they couldn't rely on their provider to provide them water. And so for them to be able to do it for their customers, they were actually going to have to develop a water source. And so this isn't something that they were going to do, but this is how they gather costs to document what it would take for them to comply with these requirements. Because again, they didn't have a water source. All they had is they were buying water from another water system with no equipment. So they would have to document the cost to develop a water well. And so in that, you see there's land costs associated with it, well site improvements, the actual well itself, the emergency generator to run that well, because again, this is a situation where we're getting a quote to how much will it cost for me to provide water if I don't have electricity, nor do I have water service from my water provider. So these costs would be allowable. And then you go through and look at the off-site well collection line, and then they would need a booster pump, because again, they don't have pressure maintenance, so this is how much it would cost for them to put in SCADA, yard pipe, and a generator for that, for the booster station. So all these costs, again, are allowable. And then you go down and you see listed there's contingency for the construction as well as engineering costs. And then they're going to use a bond, so they include those costs as well. So it's what I want to just emphasize is that if you're going to go the waiver route, take some time to really look at what is it going to take for my system for me to implement emergency operations, and provide estimates, quotes for all of that, because all of that's going to play into whether or not you're demonstrating the financial burden on your customers, those additional costs. And here's just some additional information putting all together with the interest rates for the bond and just the average annual debt. So financing is definitely key to be included when you're coming up and demonstrating the cost to your customers. So what this is basically what TCEQ is going to use to make the decision whether or not you qualify for the waiver. It's something that they use in-house. What the goal you're trying to get to is there going to be a cost increase to the point to where you're going to have more than a 2%. Let me say it a little bit better. If it's going to be, if the cost of water for your customers is going to be more than 2% of the median household income of an area that you're in, that you serve in your service area, then the waiver will be approved for that. And so, to explain a little bit better, one of the things you're going to have to do is you're going to look at what is the average annual or average median household income in my service area. That information can be gathered from a few sources. Probably one of the easiest is the census data. Census data, you go to the Census Bureau, there's a website called, or a web page on their site called Quick Facts, and it has the median household income for every county in the country. Now, counties can have very diverse income levels. And so there have been instances where when systems were submitting their waivers, they decided not to use that data from the county because it was too high. You had some counties that really have a high income level, and so that makes that median number move up a little higher, and in a lot of instances, higher than their service area. So to do that, to get it, there's other sources that you can utilize for determining your median household income. There's county data, there is data from, I believe I think it's the Housing and Urban Development. And the other option that's been utilized is an income survey. Folks will go out and they'll just survey their customers and come up with how much people actually make in their service area. And that's been pretty effective because you can see a significant difference in income. Yes, sir. Say it one more time.
Census data by zip code?
So the census data that's on Quick Facts, it goes to zip code level, but it tends to be, again, more of what's in that county, if that makes sense. That's been my experience looking at it. And so you may be able to find a zip code with maybe some more of your local resources that some counties provide on income. There's a lot of information out there, so I'm stumbling a bit because I remember there was a lot of information on household income that's available other than census. Census is kind of where folks go. Some of the larger systems, census will work for you because you serve that entire county. But some of the smaller systems, you serve a zip code or even just a small census tract. And so that data may not be accurately reflected in Quick Facts. So you might want to look at other sources. And again, doing an income survey is probably the best way to do it because then you're going specifically, and I know that can be difficult too, and so, but that is an option to come up with that number. But to walk through this, so you'll see here, we came up with that, walk out here for a second. We came up with that average use per connection. And the reason why that's important because we want to make sure that we accurately reflect how much it's actually costing for this average flow. And so remember we had that base rate, and so but the average flow is significantly higher, our average usage is significantly higher than 2,000 gallons. So it's around 17. So these other additional rates come into play here. And so with it being 17,000, then they'll also be charged this 423 as well as the 696 each month. And so then you come up with this average bill of $87, a little less than $88. And you just take that and you divide it by 12 months, and you come up with basically a little over $1,000 in this example for annual water usage. And then as we went through and we documented the cost, the annual cost, based on everything that was needed to implement the emergency operations, the EPP, as well as the financing, come up with this number. And again, that is going to be divided over the number of connections that you have. And so putting these two numbers together here, and then dividing it again by that median household income, this one came up to be a little over 3%, and this waiver was approved. And so this is just an example of how to document the cost on your customers. And that was for a build, a system that builds separately for water. Now, if you don't build separately for water, this is an example of some of the costs that can be included. So from this particular instance, you see that there's a monthly payment of $300. And so very simple, just multiply that by 12, $3,600. And then there's gas and electricity. This particular system didn't submit all. They submitted just a few months, and so it's all that TCU had to work with. So they took basically an average of that. And then this electrical and gas cost is for everything, not just used for water. And so in those instances, 10% is allowed for water right here. And so 10% of that, and there's that $50 along with the $3,600. And so that's what they were able to submit this system to show what their annual costs were for current costs for water service to their customers. Here's an example of some of the information they gathered to put in a generator and additional equipment, the transfer switch, hurricane pad. So they gathered all these costs, the battery. They even put in delivery and placement, electrical, the maintenance. There's options for how many years you're going to pay for maintenance. Those costs can be included as well as an extended warranty. Now, they didn't commit to all this, but this is the quotes that they received to implement, in this case, to put in a generator to serve their customers. And again, all this stuff can be utilized. They did site prep, all those costs as well. And then some additional costs for their fuel storage and other equipment. So again, that information is taken. There's a modified sheet for systems that don't bill directly for water. So again, just like the ones that bill, costs are put in here. Depending on the type of system, you divide it by the number of users or connections. This particular facility actually had connections, so they used that number. And they came up with this cost. And again, just like in the bill, the cost on an annual basis to implement everything after the quotes were obtained, and then dividing that, and you're coming up with these two numbers, and again, finding your median household income in your area, and this one, a little more than 2%, but this waiver also was approved. So that's how you can document some pretty basic examples of how you can document costs on your customers. All right, so with that, questions? Yes, sir.
I really don't see any place to put ongoing operations and maintenance costs. Is there a reason for that? Because that could have an impact.
So yeah, so that's on the template that you don't have. What I was showing you is what TCEQ utilizes. So this afternoon we go through resources. I'll show you the template and there's a place for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize you guys don't have it in your packet. The folks online do have it. But there is a place for that. Yes, ma'am.
For the time that we send that to them, what's the turnaround time to know if you're approved or not?
So turnaround times is going to be tough. In general, I'll tell you right now, there's approximately 4,000 affected utilities, it's approximate, that this impacts. They need to submit something, EPP waiver. The legislation says TCEQ has 90 days from the day they receive the submission to approve it. So that's the goal.
So at the same time, then we need to be prepared to go ahead and go forward with not being approved.
I would, yeah, if you're going to do a waiver, I would submit it now, as quickly as you can. Because you're right, if your waiver doesn't get approved, you still have to comply with submitting an EPP. And there's going to be a lot to review, a lot to approve. It's going to be really tough. And so if you're going to do the waiver, do it now, because you don't want to get caught into that. Now, we'll talk, I don't know if it was mentioned earlier, I missed it, but there is an extension available. The extension, from my understanding, is there's an extension, a one-time 90-day extension for either submission of your EPP or the implementation of your EPP. You have to submit that in writing to TCEQ. Email will work, but that's available to kind of help a little bit. That's also in the water code. So that, just to kind of follow up on that, there is that available. Yes, sir.
Do we know all the requirements that TCEQ is going to have? Like if we buy a generator, even though it might be inside a perimeter fence, are we going to have an additional fence and all that for the generator? Do we know all those requirements yet?
So the requirements for generators from a TCEQ standpoint is not going to change, because there's some certain systems, certain size systems now that have to provide emergency power. They always have had to do that. And so those requirements will stay in place. You mentioned specifically fencing. Well, I mean, you have to have fencing for your water system now. That doesn't change. Do you have to have additional fencing for the generator? It depends on where you put it in your facility. So those requirements don't change. That makes sense. So I know generators and facilities that have generators now, they have them inside their perimeter fence for their entire system. Not in every case is there a specific fence for the generator, in addition to the fencing for your water system. If you want to do that, you can. But there's no extra requirements for generators other than what's already in place. Right, yes, sir.
It specifically says 72 hours standby generation time is what I've read. And to do that with a large generator is going to take several hundred gallons of diesel. Will the EPA now step in and enforce secondary containment?
So I'll repeat, whatever the generator requirements are now, that's what you have put in place. Now the 72, that's a recommendation, the 72 hours. It's not a regulatory requirement, just a recommendation. I know, yeah, exactly, yeah. There's no requirement for that. There's options you can utilize to refuel your generator. I know the template does recommend 48 hours, but again, recommendation, not a regulatory requirement.
Do generators have to be permanently placed, or can they be mobile also?
Portable generators are an allowable option. They are.
Because some systems already have them mobile now.
Yes, sir. Good question. Yep. Didn't see one over here. Or? Any other questions?
Regarding portable generators and the requirements on the forms. Regarding portable generators and the requirements on the forms for on-site fuel storage, Even a small 10 kilowatt generator is going to take about 40 gallons to maintain 48 hours of use at half load. That fuel has an average life expectancy of 30 days for unleaded. You can get, 3 months for unleaded, 6 months for diesel. So if you're using an unleaded generator, I'm just curious what we're supposed to do with 40 gallons of fuel every 3 months that we don't use it.
So your fuel management is going to be something that you need to work out with your manufacturer and follow their recommendations. I know your generators are supposed to be run, tested, make sure they do work. That'll use some of it. But there's no specifics on how you manage your fuel that I'm aware of related to the emergency preparedness plan. That's something that you need to get, recommendations from on your manufacturer or whoever sells you the generator. Yeah.
There was a company that I spoke to at the annual school, and or it was a city entity anyway. They actually set up a fuel tank at their facility, and they actually put a pump on it to where they could fuel their trucks and stuff off of that equipment, so that they could rotate the fuel out. So they had a fuel station actually kind of put at their big reserve tanks for their generators, to where that their vehicles and stuff and equipment, if it was diesel, it could be the equipment, that they rotated, they filled up all their equipment there so that the fuel was constantly being resupplied, if that helps.
No, I appreciate that. Unfortunately, I'm probably the smallest public water supply system in existence for an RV park, but unfortunately, because the city won't provide clean water to each it. So I sit here trying to get into these large utility boxes at a super small entity with 96 connections using less than 2,000 gallons a day. Just trying to figure out how to
Yeah.
get into this.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
They're also cost ineffective for our system.
Can you give him the mic so folks online can hear?
We have 14 RVs in ours, and we're doing propane portable generators, what we're looking at, because your propane will go bad. Put a 100-gallon propane bottle. Okay.
And again, we're going to be here this afternoon to help out with one-on-one type questions and issues like that. So we'll be available to walk through those type of issues to help you figure out what's the best option for you to comply with these requirements. So if you have specific questions about your system, we'll be here to help you out with that. Good questions. Any more? All right. Well, I think we're scheduled for a break, okay? So we're breaking till 15-minute break, okay?